The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
So when Casey Stengel was fired as manager of the New York Yankees, the team he led to 7 World Series championships, and had just taken them to the World Series where they lost to the Pittsburgh Pirates on Bill Mazeroski's walk-off home run, Casey said, "I'll never make the mistake of turning 70 again." And within the last 24 hours, we have had 3 men north of 70 all lose their jobs in various ways. One, apparently voluntarily, with Nick Saban, who retired, at least that's the word that's being used, retired as head coach at Alabama after winning 6 championships there. We had Bill Belichick has parted ways this morning with the New England Patriots. There's a news conference to sort everything out today at noon with both Bill Belichick and Bob Kraft. They worked together for nearly a quarter of a century, had the greatest run in the history of the NFL and maybe the history of sports, winning 6 Super Bowl championships. And Pete Carroll, who is still employed by the Seattle Seahawks, but said yesterday that he tried to lobby to keep his job as head coach. And look, of those 3, it seems certain that Belichick is going to coach again. He does want the Don Shula record and needs, 15, 16 wins to still get that. So he could be around for another couple of years, at least, maybe more than that. Pete Carroll, 72, looks 52. If somebody wants him, and it's not far-fetched for Alabama to make a call. He had great success at USC, won national championships there. If he still wants to coach, Alabama might be the spot for him. That's a possibility. And then we'll see. We'll see where it goes from there. But that's where we're at now, at a time where I am not yet 70, but I can see 70 from here. And something that hit really close to home amidst all of this yesterday, totally unrelated to these coaching moves. My friend Donnie Simpson, who is, I believe, on the Mount Rushmore of Washington, D.C. radio, along with Hardin and Weaver, along with Ed Walker and Willard Scott, who were the Joy Boys, and Eddie Gallagher, who was a radio personality in Washington probably close to 60 years. I would put those on the Mount Rushmore. Yes, you have teams. You have 2 duos in the Joy Boys and Hardin and Weaver, but that's how great Donnie Simpson has been as a radio personality, and his station, Magic 102.3, facing what a lot of radio stations are facing these days, that they just don't have the revenue to support high-priced talent like Donnie, and he's worth every penny that he has ever gotten in radio. He's been great for all those years, going back to the 70s when he started doing disco radio on, I don't even remember the name of the station. WKYS was the call letters. I don't remember the numbers, but yeah, he is a fixture in Washington radio, and he said that he's not retiring. He's got 2 more shows, one today and one tomorrow, and then he's going to concentrate on his podcast, and he's got a video show, some type of show. I don't know whether it's on streaming or TV. It's hard to tell these days, but he's not going to sit back and do nothing, because he's still great, still talented, still a wonderful guy, and I wish him all the best. But yeah, it's been that kind of a day, and at 65, I look at this and go, yeah, I can see it over the hill there. I'm not quite there, but I can see it from here. So that's a very, very jarring day for me with all these shoes falling in a matter of hours with Nick Saban, Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, and now Donnie Simpson all moving on. All right, let's unpack this one by one. We'll hear from Adam Schefter coming up at 10 o'clock. Also talk to Tom Friend at 10:20. Longtime journalist, wrote for the Washington Post, Washington Times, L.A. Times. He now produces films for, I think it's an ESPN outlet, but they air, I think some of them air on Showtime. I'm not sure, but he's involved in that, and also still does some writing for Sports Business Journal. But grew up a fan of this team, fan of the then Redskins, and actually went to the same elementary school as Josh Harris and Mark Ine. I think he said his sister was in school with them. We'll talk to him about that. All Rollingwood Elementary alums. So we'll get Tom's take on that. And we spend a lot of time going back and forth during games on Twitter about what's going on, and he's very much up to speed, even though he's out on the West Coast as to what's happening with the team. All right, Belichick. This was announced this morning that, and it was reported by Adam Schefter, that Belichick and Patriots owner Bob Kraft spent a good part of this week meeting and discussing how each side wanted to proceed. From sources familiar with the conversations, there was said to be no conflict, no disagreement, and in the end, productive talks resulted in a mutual decision that left both sides comfortable and at ease. And, maybe the firing of Mike Vrabel speeded this up, because this was kind of a surprise that Tennessee let him go, but I would think he would be a top candidate for the job. They've had Gerard Mayo on the staff. He's been sort of the coach in waiting there. That's a possibility, but things are moving fast, and the Commanders situation. You look at what's going on now at Josh Harris's house down in Miami. It's like one by one they're bringing him in for interviews, and I would think it's possible we'll have somebody maybe by tomorrow, certainly by sometime next week. They'll be a head of football operations, and then they can move ahead as far as hiring a head coach. But the rush is on, and with these guys, being out there like that, even Belichick is certainly a candidate, and so is Mike Vrabel, and there are others that will, after this weekend, be available to talk to, as we'll have 6 teams eliminated from the playoffs this weekend. So there's a lot that's happening, and it's happening quickly, and it's time for the old guys to move along, make way for the young guys. I kind of know what that's all about. All right, this was Paul Feinbaum yesterday when the news came down, and it came down late in the afternoon, like 4:30 or so, that Nick Saban, who had been telling people for years, hey, I can go to Europe if I want to. I can play golf if I want to. Don't shove me out the door. I'm doing what I love to do. And then yesterday came the announcement, as he comes up on his 72nd birthday, that he is retiring. Paul Feinbaum, who probably is closer to this than any other reporter, was on with L. Duncan on ESPN last night and gave his thoughts on this, what to some of us was shocking news.
Not surprised, El, because there's been signals pointing toward this for a very long time. But the problem is every time you dare to breathe that, somebody wants to punch you in the mouth and say that he's never going to retire, that he'll be there forever. But the reality is, I think he knew how special this season was. He beat the odds. Don't forget the 4th and 31 at Auburn when nobody expected them to do it. And then he did the unthinkable. He ended the Georgia hopes of a three-peat. And I think that was very special to him because he stopped Georgia and went to the playoffs. At the Rose Bowl last week, a lot of people came out of there going, there's no way he would walk away, and the narrative got drowned out. But deep down, I think he knew this was the moment. Win or lose last week, it was a great time to leave.
Certainly no one has covered college football quite the way that you have during Saban's historic run. I joked a little bit, but you have had truly a symbiotic relationship, if you will. And I'm just wondering how you would characterize the last 2 decades that he's had in college football.
Well, I was about to say it's been unlike anything I've ever seen, but remember, and you can just take a look at me and know that I'm not lying about the fact that I covered the end of Paul Bryant for 3 years. And that final day when he announced on December 15th, 1982, that he was stepping down, it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. And I walked out of there feeling sorry for myself. I was a 25-year-old reporter who said to myself, because nobody else would talk to me back then, my career's over. I'll never cover anything this great again. And then Nick Saban landed on January 3rd, 2007. Yes, we remember that day very well. And everything changed. He won a national championship in 3 years and then 5 more and came close about 3 or 4 other times.
Who do you believe, because now that we're sort of doing a lot of introspecting, retrospecting, if we will, there's still the little matter of the fact that Alabama is a juggernaut program with lots of prospects who now find themselves without Nick Saban there. Who do you think is the best candidate to fill those very large shoes?
I think the name you're going to hear the most is Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning spent some time as a graduate assistant at Alabama before moving over to work with Kirby Smart. I think you'll hear a couple of other names. You'll hear Steve Sarkisian. I don't know if this is a reality or not, but I think at some point DeMeco Ryans' name is going to be mentioned. It's unlikely that he would walk away after a masterpiece this year in Houston, but don't forget, he was an All-American at Alabama and is beloved by that fan base. So I think that's where you start. Lane Kiffin's name will be thrown around. I don't know if that's something that will come to fruition, but those are the names you will hear the most prominently.
And the buyout, the money you'll hear as well. We just saw it there with Dan Lanning, a $20 million buyout that they'd have to pay Oregon. I want to ask you finally, Paul, because again, you guys will have, and it will go down as one of the more memorable relationships, media person and coach. Do you have a moment, though, an indelible moment that stands out to you when you think about Nick Saban?
Yes, it occurred a week after his first national championship. I went out with some friends of his to Houston for the Paul Bryant Award. Now remember, this is exactly 1 week after he beat Texas in the Rose Bowl. And we're at this cocktail party, and he saw me and gravitated toward me. So not that he liked me, he just didn't want to talk to anybody else. It was easier for him to talk to one person than 150 and take pictures. So I congratulated him. I said, "Congratulations, Coach. This must be remarkable." And he looked at me as if I had said something unkind about his family. He said, "What's so remarkable about it? I just lost a week in recruiting that I'll never get back."
And that's what he was. In fact, Feinbaum was on with Tony either last week or the week before, and he told us Saban's story of him being in Washington, and then President George Bush wanted to invite him to a dinner, and he said, "I don't have time. I have a meeting." and that's what kept him as sharp as he has been. And again, I don't rule out that he coaches someplace else, but as Feinbaum said, it was the right time for the exit. The other thing about aging is, remember when Bear Bryant retired? He started coaching in 1945 at Maryland, coached continuously till 1982. He was at Kentucky from 46 to 53, only coached 1 year at Maryland. Kentucky 46 to 53, Texas A&M 54 to 57, and Alabama 58 to 82. His last game was the Liberty Bowl, which they won, and he died a month later. He was 69, but he looked 89. Heavy smoker, used to drink bourbon while he watched game film. And when he died, I don't think people were shocked because he looked really old. Nick Saban, coming up on 72, he could pass for 52. I mean, he looks just great. All right, more thoughts on this. This was Tony and Mike yesterday, and I believe they did this live on PTI. They usually tape the show, but this news came down so late. I think they did this live at 5:30, and this was their stunned reaction to the news that Nick Saban was retiring.
Saban won 6 titles at Alabama and another one at LSU. Wilbon, what is your reaction to this?
Wow. You know, Tony,
Wow.
in the lead up, there was so much time to talk about everything that I watched shows where the question was asked and it was usually dismissed, or there was some talk and there were a couple of shows where people who cover SEC football were saying, wait a minute now, this is possible. And so you'd hear all of this discussion, but you still think, okay, and even if you believed it, it's Nick Saban. I mean, Nick Saban and Bill Belichick have dominated football at their respective levels for the last 15 and 20 years, respectively.
Yes.
One is now out, and the other could be out. And you just think, wow, college football, Tony, which to me is in total chaos. I mean, I know we're coming off a nice championship game and the college football playoff 4 and all of that. But college football, to me, is in a I'm going to say this as a college football fanatic, a season ticket holder, a booster of a Power 5 conference team. College football is a mess. And maybe we're going to find out in the coming days that Nick Saban's like, what do I need this for? Between the transfer portal and NIL, Tony, even many of the great coaches, successful coaches, Nick Saban always has a top 5 recruiting class. Many of them are just like, no, enough of this. And I wonder how he feels about all that and if there was an impact.
So I'm going to let the viewers know how this show works. And it works is that during the days, things happen and you remake whatever you were going to do and you put something in. We found out about Pete Carroll fairly close to the beginning of the show, and I was stunned that Pete Carroll was out. Totally stunned. This is a factor of 100 over Pete Carroll to
Yes,
find
it
out
is.
that Nick Saban is leaving Alabama. Nick Saban just went to the college football playoffs. Right? He went to overtime with the team that won the college championships. They're going to 12 teams next year. You can pencil him in for the next 20 years. 12 teams. Alabama's always going to be one of the 12. And he's leaving. He's an obsessive coach. He didn't take any days off all year long, basically. I did not see this coming. Can't believe it's happening. And my first thoughts, like yours, is Belichick going to leave at the same time? Are we going to lose the best college coach and the best pro coach in a matter of hours or days or something like that? And then I think, do you want this job? Everyone assumes Dabo Swinney gets the job. Or maybe Kirby Smart moves over from Georgia. He was an assistant there. Or maybe Lane Kiffin or maybe Steve Sarkisian. They were assistants to Nick Saban. But do you want it? Do you want to follow him? I'm not sure you want to follow him.
No.
I'm not sure.
And Tony, the guys you mentioned, particularly Sarkisian and Kirby Smart, they can win where they are. One has one where he is. So you don't necessarily need Alabama, but man, Saban, Tony, if there's no argument to me counter to Nick Saban being the greatest college football coach of all time. There's no argument.
No question. No question about that. The 7 national championships and winning another, at LSU along with the 61 at Alabama. Tony obviously forecast the future pretty well because we found out this morning that, in fact, Bill Belichick is out. Now, the question is going to be, is this a retirement or is he just parting ways with the New England Patriots? The people we've talked to and maybe read, heard, he really wants the Don Shula record. He's 15 away. It's 2 years. Wherever he goes, at least 2 years. It's got to be a good team. So, is he going to try and continue to coach to do that? Or is he looking at his buddy Nick Saban and, like the Sunshine Boys walking out together and heading off to play shuffleboard? I don't know. But it has been a wild 24 hours on this with Nick Saban saying he's retiring, with Pete Carroll being pushed aside in Seattle, and then the big news this morning that Bill Belichick is parting ways with the Patriots. New news conference on that coming up. Coming up, much more on the Commanders' search. The Ulticockers have all been pushed out the door in the last 24 hours with Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, and Pete Carroll all pushed aside, or Saban at least pushing himself aside. We'll talk about that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. It's not been a good day for senior citizens, has it? Senior citizens who have achieved an awful lot in their coaching careers, but 3 of them are out of work at the moment. Will they stay out of work? That's the question. First came the word that Pete Carroll had been shoved aside by the Seattle Seahawks after 14 years as head coach. He said that he lobbied to stay on as head coach, but they moved him into a, quote, advisory position, which he says he doesn't even know what that is. But clearly, at 72, they're through with him, even though he looks great. And I think has done a remarkable job with Geno Smith the last couple of years, but not good enough. As I understand it, the team is owned by Paul Allen's sister. Paul Allen never married, became, of course, very wealthy and owned a number of teams, including the Seahawks. And when he passed away, it went to his sister, and from what I've read, I think the year is 2025. There's some type of a tax window in the state of Washington where she will save a lot of money on taxes when she sells the team. And, based on the way the value of teams keeps going up and up and up, where you had just a year apart, the Broncos and the Commanders sell for a difference of $2 billion, she may wait a little bit longer. But I don't know if she made this decision or someone helped her in the front office, but Pete Carroll's no longer the coach. And then came even more stunning news that Nick Saban was retiring. What? He had a great year, and he kept telling people, I'm not retiring. He just last year signed an 8-year contract. Now, that had a lot to do with recruiting. when he goes to recruit players and other coaches are saying, hey, that old Nick Saban, he's 71. He's not going to be there that much longer. So the 8-year contract was to say to the other recruiters from other schools, oh, yeah, well, watch this. I could stay on until I'm 80. Just watch me. But he retired yesterday, and then the news today, and it was not unexpected. It's just that it's such a monumental move for a coach that won 6 Super Bowls that it was announced that Bill Belichick and the Patriots are parting ways. There's a new news conference with Belichick and Bob Kraft to discuss all this. There was, Belichick's under contract, and towards the end of the season, you heard a lot of, Bob Kraft is going to try and get compensation for him. He's going to try and trade him. I don't think there was much on the trade market, and I also don't think they wanted to miss out on Mike Vrabel. Vrabel is available now that he was, and they had the right to get compensation too. Tennessee, they cut him loose before that. So it would seem to be a pretty smooth move if you want to bring in Mike Vrabel right now. You have to fulfill the Rooney Rule, and there are some things that go into that, and it won't happen like tomorrow. But that's the way that's going. So all that happening very fast, and I just look at myself at 65, and I go, ooh, well, I guess, no matter how well you think you're doing, they're looking in another direction at some point. Now, if Belichick was competing for Super Bowls still, he'd probably still be in New England because he wants the Don Shula record. He's still 15 away from most wins all time. There's that. I would think that if Nick Saban wanted to stay longer at Alabama, they'd love to have him. I'm sure this is not being greeted very well. Even the diehard fans who don't think not winning a national championship isn't good enough. And then with Pete Carroll, I think Seattle fans liked him. And he said at the end of the season how energized he was for another year. So they're not all going, smiling out the door, but a big era in all 3 places is ending. The shortest tenured one is Pete Carroll at 14 years, which is, very unusual in the NFL. Very few coaches last more than 10 years in one place, and he was good enough to do that, even though it's been quite some time since he took the team to the Super Bowl. Let me get to a couple of things that have been written today in the papers. And by the way, on Belichick, if you're thinking here, all the beat reporters have tweeted this, from Ben Standig to Nikki Javala, John Keim, all of them. They're saying, all their sources are telling them no chance Belichick comes here. But there are some national people who are still putting it out there that Josh Harris would be interested in doing it. But according to what Nikki has today in the Post, their focus right now is on finding a head of football operations. And the leading candidate appears to be Adam Peters, who is the San Francisco 49ers assistant GM. And there is a connection to Bob Harris, who is not to Bob Harris, to Bob Myers. They're not brothers. Bob Myers, the former general manager of the Golden State Warriors, who is advising Harris on this. They had the same agent, Wasserman. So there's a connection there. And according to reports, Josh Harris at his mansion in Miami this week has been interviewing candidates one by one, has already talked to Peters. And Nikki says it's down to 5 candidates for this job, for this executive job, and the executive will be involved in the hiring of a head coach. And the 5 candidates are Peters, Kansas City Chiefs assistant GM Mike Borgonzi, Cleveland Browns assistant GM and vice president of player personnel Glenn Cook, Philadelphia Eagles assistant GM Alex Halabi, and Chicago Bears assistant GM Ian Cunningham. And the Bears situation is interesting, too. I'll get to that in just a moment. But the way that the timeline works here, according to what she has in the story, a candidate interviewing for a primary executive role can accept a new job at any point during the playoffs if his or her current team grants permission. Coaching candidates cannot interview in person until at least after the divisional round. So far, 4 teams, the Panthers, Raiders, Chargers, and Commanders, have vacancies for their primary executive jobs. And, boy, the Eagles thing, that could be a real mess. If they get blown out in this playoff game against Tampa, I think it's possible that Nick Sirianni goes and maybe the whole thing gets blown up and they start all over again. Because Doug Peterson was fired 2 years after winning a Super Bowl. So they don't have a lot of patience there. There's that. And also the Eric Bieniemy story. And you heard the other day after Ron Rivera was fired, when Josh Harris had his Monday news conference, he said that Bieniemy would be a candidate for the job, and he said Bieniemy is still on the job right now. The only person who's been fired is Ron Rivera. They've kept everybody in place, and you do that because when a new coach comes in, you say, who would you like to keep? And in the case of Bieniemy, he's still under contract. So they wouldn't even have to do any negotiation with him if they want him to stay. But Michael Phillips, who's now with the Times, used to be with the Richmond Times-Dispatch, covered this team for many years, he's got to look at what Bieniemy did this year and what started it out as, oh boy, look at what all these teams missed out on because, number one, Eric Bieniemy won the news conference. The day he was introduced, he blew a lot of people away. He was very impressive. And throughout training camp and the season, his news conferences were great. You'd run through a wall for this guy, it would seem. But you also saw regression with his offense, and you heard pushback from players, including at the end of the season, Logan Thomas said, I might be the only one to say it, but I think we had our ups and downs. We had some good, we had some bad. It's one of those things where something new comes in after you've been used to something else for a couple of years, and sometimes you can bang heads. And Rivera said, shouldn't have said it, but said it in training camp, oh, yeah, some of the players have come to me and have complained about Bieniemy's coaching style. So there's that. And if you win, that's great. Yeah, he kicks some ass, so sure, they're going to pay attention. But when you finish the season with 8 straight losses, it's not good. Also, the numbers. Remember that the offense was considered under Scott Turner last year. Well, they were 24th in the league in offense. This year, they're 25th in the league. So there's that. And so Eric Bieniemy is going to be interviewed here if he wants to be. He may not even want to be because if he thinks he's not going to be a candidate for the job, he's probably not going to take the interview. And you wonder, with what we saw from the regression, not the continued advancement of the quarterback, Sam Howell, our team's now going to be as interested or less interested in him. As it turns out, it might have been better for him to stay another year in Kansas City. And you've heard some comments out of Kansas City that he's been the missing piece, that he kept a lot of things together. But as an offensive coordinator now, you'd have to look at his role as kind of dubious as to what exactly happened this year. This is from earlier this morning. This is Adam Schefter on ESPN. More details on the Belichick parting of the ways in New England and who might be in line to take his place and where he might go.
There will be a press conference today at noon. There will be a press conference today at noon in Foxborough, where both Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick are scheduled to attend. They will make statements there and tell people from their perspective, I think, about what each man meant to each other. And now the questions will be what happens to each side. The Patriots embark upon their first head coaching search in a quarter century. They haven't done something like this in 25 years. Now, I believe the focus in Foxborough will be on Gerard Mayo, the Patriots linebackers coach, whom the organization holds in high regard, and I believe he will be if not the favorite candidate to become the next head coach of the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick will be a coaching free agent. There are currently 7 other teams aside from New England with coaching vacancies, and I would think that any team with a vacancy would have some level of interest in wanting to talk to the greatest coach of all time. The team that would make some sense, I think, in the eyes of many across the league would be the Atlanta Falcons. If we remember in the past, Arthur Blank once pursued and didn't get Bill Parcells. Bill Belichick learned at the feet of Bill Parcells the Falcons could use a head coach. There's nobody more accomplished than Bill Belichick, and that would certainly seem to make some sense if that's an avenue that the Falcons decide to pursue. But we have entered into a new era here in New England, and that is the fact that the Patriots will have a new coach. Bill Belichick will be coaching somewhere else, and today there will be a press conference at noon in Foxborough to formalize it.
Adam, that's a search for the head coach looking forward to the Patriots. And Bill Belichick, we know, acting as GM as well. What do you know about the search in that aspect now for a new GM for the Patriots?
Well, they have to decide what they want to do first. You have to decide, every organization does, whether they want to pursue a head coach or a general manager first. And in this case, I expect that the Patriots will look for a head coach before they look for a general manager. And it's a situation where if you have somebody that you've identified, somebody that you believe in, and I believe that to be the case with Gerard Mayo, then they'll go talk to him. They'll look at other candidates. A lot of people also, Christina, wondered if the Patriots could and would hold out to trade Bill Belichick, seek compensation the way that the Saints got back for Sean Payton after he took off a year from football. But throughout the course of the week, as the Patriots owner Robert Kraft and the Patriots head coach, former head coach Bill Belichick, met, it became obvious that the Patriots were going to take the high road here, not pursue compensation, not hold back Bill Belichick from seeking employment elsewhere. And so the two sides essentially agreed to part ways without New England seeking any compensation in return, which had been one of the questions that had followed this particular situation as it unfolded throughout the course of the year, whether New England would do that. The Patriots won't do that. And so there we have it, and Bill Belichick will be a coaching free agent.
Okay, so what Schefter is saying, it sounds like the Patriots are not going to hire an executive first. They're going to look for a coach first. And he seems to think that Atlanta could be a destination for Bill Belichick. That's entirely possible. You got Arthur Blank with a lot of money, the Home Depot guy, and maybe he's able to attract them there. Atlanta, and I was in Atlanta this year for a game. It has the same feel of here, only a better stadium, nice place to play, because they haven't won a lot. They did make it to the Super Bowl, and boy, wouldn't that be something to get the hair of the dog that bit you, right? The 28-3 lead that they blew in the Super Bowl to Belichick, and then Belichick comes there. A lot of irony to that, but that's what he is reporting right now. That seems to be a possibility. Again, the beat reporters here are all saying, forget it, Belichick's not coming to Washington. Now, there's another level here it's another angle it's interesting to look at, and that is that the Bears are sticking with Matt Eberflus, the coach. Now, he was on his way out when they came to town the fifth week of the season. Remember the Thursday night game? They were 0-4. They looked absolutely terrible. And the feeling was, boy, if the Commanders blow out the Bears in a nationally televised game, that's going to be it for Eberflus. He's not going to survive the season. Well, they got better. They got Justin Fields playing well. And Fields right now may stay. And there's an interesting look at this from Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network, in that because you've got Eberflus staying and you don't get a lot of latitude when you come back off a losing season, that it might be possible that Fields stays. And that would impact the Commanders, because you've already heard reports that they're looking to trade up, that they want to get Caleb Williams at number 1. And so if the Bears are not going to draft a quarterback, they might be more likely to trade if they're sticking with Fields. Question is, are they sticking with Fields? Here's Rappaport on that with Dan Patrick.
I would like to know the evaluations of Drake May. I'd like to know the evaluations of Caleb Williams. I'd like to know the evaluations of, whoever else would figure into that spot. And I think that's really what this is. It's not, did Justin Fields do well enough to stick around? Like, he did very well. By the end of the year, Justin Fields looked really good. That's actually not sort of what makes the decision. What makes the decision is, I have these evaluations of these quarterbacks who are coming out of the draft. How do I compare that with what I've seen from Justin Fields on an NFL field, plus the contract that Justin Fields would be getting, plus, compare that to the cheaper contract a rookie would be getting, plus the compensation you'd be getting when you trade Fields. It's all a mathematical equation, essentially. But the unknown is, how good is Caleb Williams? Like, some people think he's Mahomes. Very possible. Some people think he is not. It's also possible. It's the biggest decision that Ryan Poles will ever make. And I don't think they're there yet.
And he said, Poles yesterday said that he was going to walk this right up to April. And why not? See what he can get in compensation. And opinions change as we get closer to the draft. We're still a ways away. That's not till April, and we're in early January now. So the feelings about Caleb Williams and Drake May, they may change over the course of time. One more thing from Rappaport, as Patrick was asking him to evaluate the openings, and two of them, I think, had not yet even opened up at that point. I think Pete Carroll was still with Seattle, and Bill Belichick, of course, was still with New England. But this is Rappaport on what he thinks the Commanders offer with their opening.
It might take a minute. I certainly think it might take a minute. you need a quarterback. I think you're probably going to get one with the number 2 pick. It's a harder build, but then there's the other, like, there's going to be the stadium things that are going on. There's the business side that needs to be fixed. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that the new ownership group really gets it and has proven they get it. You know what I mean? And so I would say that's a really good job. It would just take a little longer to be a really good job.
And that might not be a bad thing, because you could come in here after all the stupidity and the going for it when they really weren't in a position to go for it over the 25 years of Dan Snyder. That might be an advantage, where you come in and say, okay, we're going to build this thing the right way. It may take a couple of years. It may take 3 years, but sit back. And I think the fan base would be willing to accept that. This is not like other cities. Oh, what's the matter? You got to have a winner here. No, I think after the way things have gone here for so long, somebody comes in with a good plan, building through the draft and building up through free agency where they have cap room, but don't go after the biggest names possible. Stop picking people off the Sports Center. I think that might be an advantage. I'll get some thoughts on this from Tom Friend coming up. Longtime journalist, used to write for the Post and the Times, a big fan of the football team going back to when he was a kid growing up and going to games with his dad. We'll talk about that and more with Tom Friend. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Going long today. Tony is off on this Thursday, so we're going till noon. Tom Friend, longtime journalist, wrote for the Washington Post, Washington Times, covered the team he grew up rooting for. The then Washington Redskins, is now out on the West Coast producing films, writes for Sports Business Journal. And it seems like on Sunday we're always going back and forth on Twitter about what's going on. So, there's a lot of stuff to talk about today, and some of it may relate to the Commanders with all these old coaches going out. But just your thumbnail take on what has happened since the end of the season with this team.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not unexpected. Obviously, Ron Rivera was going to go. I feel like they've done a really good job. I mean, I feel like right now, if you look at it outside looking in, the Peters situation is somebody that I feel like you want to go get. I mean, he is the Bobby Beathard of when this franchise became what it became. It started with a general manager, a guy that really got it, a guy who knew how to pick the head coach, a guy who knew how to draft. So and he was an assistant down in Miami. He was a young guy. They move him over. He takes the job. I think it was 78. And this is the model, sort of what Josh Harris is doing with getting a general manager. I think that Peters is the guy I hope they get. So that's really a good move there. The coaching situation, I think, is going to go from there. Whoever he hires, they hire to be the GM or president of football operations is going to be the guy that picks the coach, basically, or have a huge input into it, right?
Yeah, and I'm totally on board with that, and the Beathard comparison is good. Beathard came here, and it was Jack Pardee was the coach at the time, and they butted heads, and he's the one that brought in this young guy named Joe Gibbs, and if you use that model, then you're eliminating all these sexy names that suddenly became available. They're old, but they're still sexy names. And you continue to read the national guys say, oh, yeah, there's still real interest in Bill Belichick here. With this structure, I don't see it happening. Do you see any chance of that actually happening here?
I was thinking this just a minute ago. If Dan Snyder was still the owner, this would be your hire.
Right.
That's who he would go get. But this is not Dan Snyder's team anymore, so I think it makes no sense. I think the fan base would revolt. And you talk about us going back and forth on Twitter. On Twitter, where people are madmen, I just threw out the fact that, just for a joke kind of, to see, I said, Sam Howell, Drake May couldn't beat out Sam Howell in college. How's he going to beat him out now? It's just a joke. We're all joking around. But the bottom line is you hire Belichick and this place goes crazy. It's not what the fan base wants. It's not the right move. He's 72 years old, basically, and then you got to start over again, even if he does well, in a few years here real quick. So it's not the move. He isn't on the top of his game right now. So I feel like a young coach, like a Gibbs was back in 81, someone like, to me, if you look at Peters, connect the dots. If Peters, if he takes the job, Slowick, right? Wasn't he in San Francisco? He's a Shanahan disciple.
Right. He's in Houston now. Houston had a great year. Right. Yeah.
Right, and he developed a young quarterback, a number 2 overall quarterback. That Slowick did. So that seems like a good move. A guy I've been championing, nobody really pays much attention to me typically, is Brian Griese, who's the quarterback coach with the 49ers, who basically has tutored Brock Purdy the whole way. He's a guy who has tremendous people skills. I've always been a big fan of his. We'll see. I don't think they'll probably consider him, but that's the guy who Peters is familiar with. We'll see what his connections are. I mean, obviously, Beathard was a guy who saw the whole league, saw that Gibbs was this up-and-coming assistant coach, offensive coordinator in San Diego, and he brings him in. I'm sure that this would be the same way with Peters. He's a very bright guy.
Let me back up. That's the first time I've heard the name Brian Griese connected. Are you suggesting head coach to come here? Griese?
Head coach. Yeah, head coach. And it's probably people probably don't realize this. He's 48 years old. He's not a young guy. He did TV at ESPN. He was a Michigan quarterback when Brady was there. He is a guy who in Denver was understudied at John Elway, has the Shanahan connections from Denver, goes to San Francisco after he leaves ESPN, and has been Brock Purdy's right hand. I know they've mentioned him. I know for a fact they've mentioned him. I'm not meaning that they're interested in him. I know he's been mentioned.
Right. Well,
but he's not been acquired. No one's pursued him for an interview. I think right now he probably gets an offensive coordinator job somewhere. There's talk that the Bears may go after him. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there.
That's interesting, and in a structure where you do have a strong general manager, that might make sense, because if you bring in an established coach, he's going to butt heads with the GM, and that's what eventually happened with Gibbs and Beathard. Yep. That Gibbs got more powerful, and that led Bobby to go say, I'm from California, I want to go surf and stuff.
Well, Bobby wasn't going to win that power right. struggle with Cook. Cook was going to choose Gibbs every day of the week.
Right, and that's what happened. And then we saw, I love Charlie Casserly, but Casserly was not as good as Bobby Beathard putting together teams, and that ultimately led to some downfall. But compared to what we've had recently, it was the glory days. We're talking to Tom Friend, longtime journalist and a longtime fan of this team. I don't know how much we've discussed this since the Harris purchase happened. You have some kind of connection, right? Same elementary school. Didn't you say your sister went to school, same class with Josh and Mark Ein?
Yeah, my sister was the same grade with Mark Ein and Josh Harris at Rollingwood Elementary School. I was 4 years older than them, so I was a patrol. So I remember crossing, patrol back in the D.C. area. I used to cross kids as they're walking to school on Rollingwood Drive and Rolling Road and Leland Street back when I was growing up, in Chevy Chase, Maryland. So yeah, I knew those kids, but they were much younger than me. I used to kick them off the court, kickball, that kind of stuff. But yeah, that made really bright kids, bright guys. My sister speaks highly of them. They are great people. So I know their backgrounds now. I think, Josh Harris's father was the dentist, or I think orthodontist or dentist to many of my friends. He was a very established guy, very well known in the community. People thought he was great. So the family's well respected. He's a solid guy. I mean, I think he's doing the right thing by bringing in people to consult and everything. I just feel like, I'm the odd guy here. I wasn't thinking, let's lose, let's tank. Because now, first of all, once they got to a certain point, that second pick becomes leverage to get a good coach and a good general manager. For that reason, phenomenal. But this whole quarterback thing, Andy, I'm not thrilled about. The further they got up the charts there, it puts so much pressure for them to address the quarterback. And I just don't think picking a quarterback at 1 or 2 is as sweetheart a thing as everybody thinks it is. I mean, if you look at the league right now, the number 1 or number 2 overall picks in the NFL, former number 1 overall picks, DJ Stroud and Joe Burrow are the only ones who you could say, oh my gosh, I want them as my quarterback. The others are Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, Bryce Young, Baker Mayfield, and I guess Carson Wentz because he came off the bench. This is it. Everybody who's in the top 9 teams in the NFL right now, Brock Purdy in San Francisco, Jalen Hurts, low pick, obviously, last pick. Jalen Hurts, second round. Dak Prescott, way down. Josh Allen, middle to late first round. Mahomes, middle 10, I think it was. Baltimore, Lamar Jackson, end of the first round. Miami, Tua, he was pretty high. But the only guys were really Goff and Stafford, who were number 1 or number 2 overall picks, who were just in the playoffs, but they're not dominant guys. There's no guarantee here. I mean, obviously, but Caleb Williams, he's a guy that's so intriguing. But after that, I just think, man, I almost want to trade down. I know everybody's going to hate that, but I think the number 2 pick gets you the GM, gets you the head coach. But, man, when you attack – this draft is the most important draft in Washington history since 81.
Oh, yeah.
And 81, they nailed it with offensive line. Okay, so and an edge rusher in Dexter Manley. So that's what happens in '81 with Dallas. With Jimmy Johnson comes in his first draft. That made their whole franchise. You got Troy Aikman #1, which turned out great. But it's just this first draft is going to be so huge for this new coach. And if you put all your chips in on quarterback, it is such a crapshoot. I'd rather get the best elite offensive tackle, the kid from Penn State or Notre Dame, whoever you decide is the best guy, and roll that way, or trade down and get more picks. But I'm the minority on that. But
Tom, they were burned on this with Chase Young just a few years ago, where there were quarterbacks like Tua and Justin Herbert on the board, and no, this is a generational defensive player. He's not. And so you can whiff on that too. And you just mentioned Troy Aikman, and there's Peyton Manning, and there's ones that do work out. Now you're right about the recent ones, and this time last year we're going, hey, Jacksonville made its franchise by taking Trevor Lawrence. Well, now you're hearing, maybe the Trevor Lawrence era is going to end.
But I just named you the top 9 teams in the NFL playoffs.
Yeah,
I know. They're all built around good defenses, solid quarterbacks, really good quarterbacks, but not guys who were taken #1 overall.
Yeah.
So it's just it's and also you want a guy who's durable. I mean, Bryce Young, it scares me how little he is. I mean, that's why Shane Daniels, you look at him on paper, on his film, he looks incredible, but he's just a slight guy. I don't know. It's just such a crapshoot. And I'd rather take if you get a tackle, you just know you can put in there for the next 12, 15 years. It happened twice in this franchise. I mean, they did it with Chris Samuel. They did it with Trent before the whole ordeal there.
Yeah.
And,
but you got to get lucky, too. They took Mark May in the first round, and Joe Jacoby turned out to be the better tackle, who they got in free agency, undrafted free agent. So, you just never know. We're talking.
But May was further down in the draft a little bit.
Yeah, but he was still first round, and he was Outland Trophy, and they had never, they gone like 7 or 8 years without using a first round pick. They've always traded him away. Some of that George Allen, but yeah, there was that. We're talking to Tom Friend about the state of the Commanders, and as I mentioned, Tom now lives in L.A., so maybe you have a little bit more familiarity with Caleb Williams than I do. I mean, I've seen him play on TV, and I've heard a lot, and you hear that he's the next Mahomes and so forth. Would you, if they did trade up, and there's that possibility with the Bears keeping Matt Eberflus, and maybe they stick with Justin Fields, that they would trade with the Commanders at 1, would you support them taking them?
That's the guy that is he's the first of the Mahomes youth. Remember when Steph Curry first came on the team, we saw the Steph Curry youth. Now we're seeing the Mahomes youth, and Caleb, he really does look that way. Now, is he going to be that? I mean, there's people who question his toughness. We've been through all this. Who knows? He's the one guy that I'd say, if you can get that guy, yes. The problem is I wouldn't trade up. You're going to get fleeced. Don't do it. You need more assets. Don't give away your assets. I think if you lose him, and I think what's going to happen is, my personal opinion, the Bears, if they don't take him, they're going to trade out of that spot. And a team like New England, somebody else whose quarterback need is going to trade into it and going to give up the world to get him. So I don't know if you really want to go up 1 and do it, but he's the closest guy to you say, wow, he's too intriguing to not do. The May thing, haven't seen him enough. I think Daniels, I have seen it. He played against my alma mater, Missouri, and lit him up. Mm-hmm. He's the only loss we had at home. He was unbelievable that game. Unbelievable. He was playing hurt. He's tough. He looked like a tough kid. I think Penix loses a lot of steam after that championship game, and you're going to get him later in that round. So, I think Caleb's the one guy. Yeah, that hometown. Being a hometown guy,
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was just going to go there. That to me gives me a little bit of pause. Now, it's not the same guy, but that was a problem with Dwayne Haskins here, and that's a problem for a lot of guys because everybody's
Chase Young. We think,
right.
So much expectation.
Yeah, and people bother hey, can I get some tickets from you? You're just not left alone. Kevin Durant, I think, was right in saying it probably wasn't a good idea to play in your hometown. So that's the thing that would give me a little bit of pause on Williams.
But not enough to pause not to take him.
Yeah, right.
That's the guy I think I would take. I'm sold on him being out here. I think it's hard that second year after winning the Heisman. It's just with NIL, we don't know all the dynamics. He's getting paid. He's living in a penthouse. Mm-hmm. I mean, the guy's living like Mahomes. So not really, but to a degree. So who knows if last year was a good estimation what kind of kid this guy is? I think he's a really talented player. it can play off schedule so well.
You know, I don't know if you saw this, but Ryan Leaf makes regular appearances with Dan Patrick, and he had a really interesting take on what you just mentioned about the penthouse. He said when he came into the NFL, instantly rich, and it overwhelmed him, and he obviously didn't handle it well. He says now with these NIL deals, these guys are coming in rich. They've had money for a couple of years, so maybe it doesn't overwhelm them. So maybe that's another
great point.
Yeah, another reason to take them. I don't know. But yeah, it is a good point. Quick thoughts on this, because you've covered the sports world a long time. Belichick and Saban going out, maybe for certainly different reasons, different sports, really. But do you think Saban is out because he is really, 72, done it all, tired, or do you think he was driven out by the NIL and the transfer portal and all the other stuff that's with college football now?
Yeah, I think it's all of that. I think coaching in college football now, it's no longer recruiting. Got to recruit with a stash of cash in your hand with you. It's a whole different world, and they'll probably do an alternative Monday night broadcast, the two of them together. They're best friends. I just feel like it probably has to do with that. You've seen him moan and groan about recruiting, about NIL, and the college sports landscape, and plus you got Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC. It's the conference is evening up. Georgia's a power. It's a tough gig now. Alabama doesn't just run through it anymore. And it's a difficult job.
Yeah. Do you think Belichick coaches? I think he coaches I think he wants Shula's record. I think he's going to coach again in the NFL.
I think there's a Dan Snyder clone out there. We know where it is, down south.
Yeah. Would he do that? Why not? Yeah. I mean, guys like that. You know what? Guys like that always say, "Oh, I can handle him." Right? I mean,
yeah.
And we saw that here with Mike Shanahan. Oh, I can handle him. Marty Schottenheimer.
Vrabel's going to end up in New England, right?
Yep.
And Dan Quinn's going to end up in Seattle, and those natural fits there. And then it's going to be a situation like if I'm watching an Atlanta situation as a coach. I mean, look how Blank ends up firing that guy at midnight. I mean, he's just to make a statement. What could wait. It's just I wouldn't want to go there. Even though they have a lot of offensive talent.
Yeah.
I think Washington's gig is with all the cap space, all the draft capital, a starved fan base, a stadium about to be built relative, at some point here. There's just so many upsides to it. Maybe I know I'm biased going up there, but I just feel like this is the job for the first time in a long time. This is a job, the destination. I feel like they're going to get. That's why Peters turned down interviews other places, but not Washington.
Yeah, well, he's apparently got a connection here with Bob Myers, so that might be part of it. But last thing to put a bow on this, here's the way I feel. We're relatively the same age, same experience. This is the most excited I've been for this team since Joe Gibbs came back 20 years ago. What's your reference point on this?
I would say this. I'm so jaded now. Being excited, maybe that's the wrong word. I'm really anticipating this offseason. I feel like this is the biggest offseason in this franchise history in a real long time. I mean, since the Gibbs hire. Obviously, Norv Turner hire, that was a big offseason. You had that Schuler pick, and they didn't make it work. And this could go down that same road in some ways if this goes south on the pick. This draft is so huge, how they handle it. And it's going to set the tone on how people perceive the Harris regime. It's going to set the tone how they perceive this general manager. This draft is everything, and no pressure, but I'll be excited when I see how they use their assets. And that's really it.
Very good. Hey, thanks, Tom. Good to talk to you as always.
Great, Andy. Take it easy.
That's Tom Friend, and you can read his work on Sports Business Daily, and he does producing of some feature films, and longtime fan of this team like I am. Went to games with his dad and was a big Sonny fan, and so we come at this from the same kind of reference point, and it's always fun to talk to him about our favorite football team. Rex pointed this out to me on Twitter, and we're in this swirl here where all these names are going around for other teams as well as this one and who they're talking to. But Jonathan Jones of CBS says the Commanders have narrowed their search for the president of football operations to two candidates, Bears assistant GM Ian Cunningham and 49ers assistant Adam Peters. The Post reported from Nikki Jabala that Peters is the top candidate, and he's the first name that you heard, assistant GM with the 49ers. He probably is the one that they really want, but he may decide I'm not interested in a long rebuild like that, and I may wait for another opportunity. Who knows? But if these guys are good, and they are, they will get their man. They'll make it happen. Thanks for Tom Friend for coming on. Thanks to Rex Minturn for running the show. See you tomorrow, 9 a.m.